Hey Farm Fam, it's Todd from Headwaters Homestead. I know we just threw a video up the other day, but I wanted to tag on a follow-up here. It's another beautiful day here in Northeast Ohio. We're pushing near the 80s today, and I'm working out in the gardens again, so a little hot and sweaty, a little sticky. But I wanted to show a quick comparison between what we did as far as weed prep yesterday as experimenting with another way to weed the garden. So these are the beds we did yesterday, and as you can see, they're all uniform depth, nice loose soil. We did go around and mow after prepping these beds, so you will see there's a little loose grass on the top, but none of it has seed heads, so none of that's going to establish. That's just going to break down into nitrogen and fertilizer for the beds laying there. But you can see that these are nice, clean. They're weed free all the way to the edges, and there is really nothing wrong with these beds at all. All right, so for today, this is what we're using. Again, I already mentioned this is a Stihl tiller. It's got a little 2-stroke engine on it. It's a relatively small unit. It's got a 4-tine wheel down here with 2 what looks to be about 10-inch wheels on the back. Real nice, easy to start up. This is a rental. I've got it for a few hours, so while I'm using it, I thought I'd give you my thoughts on it. It's got an adjustable depth gauge on the back, hand-controlled throttle, easy pull start, small lightweight tiller. I didn't want to go with a full-size heavy tiller for a couple of reasons. One, it would have broken soil too deep down, and 2, it would have been a little hard to maneuver in the 4-foot wide beds I have, whether it's a 4x4, 4x8, 4x12, or 4x16. Those are all ones we're working on today. We're going to trial it out and see if we like the way that this tiller works, or if we like the manual technique that we used yesterday. All right, so here we have the first bed that we've done with the tiller. It did a nice job of loosening it up. What I found though was that motor and the little 2-stroke engine that's on that was not really strong enough to break up the dirt this far down initially. I had to come back and go over this with a broad fork to loosen it up first. Once I loosened it up with the broad fork, then the Stihl did a nice job of breaking up all of that, but to really loosen the soil up to get it down deep, I still had to go over this first with a broad fork. One of the things I noticed going around this is that I'm still going to have to rake this out as well, as it doesn't till uniformly, especially on the ends where I needed to turn or do some maneuvering to be able to get it into the tight corners. It's not really great at that. It's also not great at going down along the edge here. I found a lot of the time I was needing to straddle the bed, both with the tines and the tiller wheel, just in order to get to these corners and sides. The other thing that I noticed is when we did this by hand yesterday, we first pulled out all the weeds. Running the tiller through leaves a lot of that weedy material, a lot of those root balls. So I'm going to have to go through and fish those out as well. For dandelions and plantain and things like that, I'm not worried quite as much. But for the grasses that spread by rhizome, and for plants like the creeping Charlie that gets into these beds, all that weed matter being ground up and tilled up inside the bed is just going to allow that to establish from whatever pieces of those roots are left over. So I think I really do like manually weeding these by getting that all pulled and out before I loosen it up with a broad fork, and before I run a garden weasel over it and then rake it out even. So I'll still rake these out even, and I'll try to rake out as many of those root clods and the weedy material that I can, but I'm seeing that there's a lot more of it left in the bed, and that's something I'm going to bet later in the season we're going to have to contend with, is getting that stuff removed. All right, here's another bed that we've worked with the tiller on. Again, in tight spaces, the mechanical tiller It's a little bit harder to work with than doing it by hand. Again, you can see there's a lot of weed and root mass that's in there. I've noticed in particular on the corners and on the sides, we end up throwing a lot of dirt out of the bed using the tiller, whereas we were able to keep the majority of the dirt in the bed doing it by hand. I've also noticed that when you're doing it by hand, you can feel the texture of the soil much better. The mechanical tiller really takes that away. So I know when I'm using the garden weasel, if I hit a patch of clay, I can feel that, and I can know to push down a little bit harder and work the soil a little bit more to loosen it up. Now with the tiller, it makes no differentiation. It still tears through that, but I think I get a better feel for what the consistency of my soil is when I do it by hand. And again, you know, my big concern is all this weed material. That is something that I'm almost certain is going to grow back into these beds, and that I'm going to have more weed pressure in a bed like that than in one of the ones that we have manually done. And you can see here, here's the next bed we're going to till in. I'm also going to take this tiller over the potato mounds to see how it does loosening those up. One thing I'm noticing as I run this, every once in a while I got to stop and clear the tines, especially in the areas where there's a lot of weeds, especially the creeping Charlie and the grassy weeds. They have a tendency to get all bound up here in these tines, and then it just doesn't seem to want to eat the earth quite as well. All right, real quick here, because my camera battery is on its way to dying, but you know, I hate to give a bad review, mostly because there's enough negativity out there. If you don't have something positive to say, you know, maybe just let it go and not say anything at all. I will say for the garden beds, the work that I did the day before, I actually found that doing it by hand is a lot more effective than using the tiller here. But on a positive note, I did find a place where this tiller excels, and that is our raised mound potato beds. Now, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about here, this is one of our beds before I have taken the tiller to it. And you can see it's got creeping Charlie that's growing up on top of it. There's a dandelion sticking up, and there's some grass that's encroached on it. You can almost barely tell that there is a mound here. Now, these mounds are alternating levels of topsoil and wood chips, and they're a great medium for growing our potatoes in. You can see that, you know, from the yard, weeds encroach on the mounds, so I'm not really as worried about them being on the mounds because I'm not going to win that fight. There's no border like there is around the garden bed to keep it out. But once I run the tiller over it, look at how these beds turned out. That is nice, loose soil. Sure, there's a bank of grass on the edges, but everything got tilled in there, mixed in real well. That's light and fluffy. I'm going to rake it a little more centered so that it'll be a true mound. But for projects like this, where you just got to loosen up some soil, you're not as concerned about the weed content, or even if you're just looking to fluff up and loosen the soil, this little guy rocks. All right, farm fam, time to take the tiller back, but before I do, I just want to give a real quick overview on my thoughts on this particular tool. Overall, I'll give it probably a solid 3.5 out of 5. Pros for this: it's very lightweight, so it's easy to lift up, throw in the back of the truck, maneuver around. Super simple to start, runs reliably. It's a Stihl. I like their products. I know it would last and hold up. And for projects like the potato beds or loose soil that I just want to loosen and fluff up, it works ideally for those. Cons are the lightweight is a negative factor as well. It's just not got enough heft to it to really get those tines in and break up strong root masses like ground ivy has. The tines are also relatively small on it, meaning that they get clogged up quite a bit if there are a lot of roots in what you're trying to till in. The lightweight is both a pro and a con when it comes to this. I would not recommend it if you're doing heavy tilling, especially if there's grass or any kind of vegetative cover on it. This just doesn't have the balls to cut through that matter. But if it's a bed that's already broken in and it doesn't have a lot of weed pressure, it would work ideally for it. I did notice in tilling in the beds that I did lose a lot of soil with this. Soil just getting thrown outside, getting thrown off of those tines as they were chewing through the dirt. I didn't have nearly as much soil loss doing it by manual means like we did yesterday. Overall, I like it. I'm glad I tried it before I bought it. For the needs that we have here on the homestead, I don't think I'd drop the money down for one of these. I would rent it for specific needs here on the homestead. It's a great little tool. I don't want to knock it. I don't want to make you think it's not a good tool. But I think there are better tools out there for the job that we want to do. I'm going to run this back to the hardware. I'm going to pick up some topsoil and some compost and manure mix to top off the beds that I did today. And that's going to be about it for today. So thanks for following along. Thanks for watching. Take care until next time, farm fan. Have a great one.